Joyce. We're here today to talk about competency-based interview and how one prepares for the interview and do their documentation and how they present on the day of the interview. So if we start with the application form.
As everybody is aware, we follow the structured competency-based interview process in the HSE. And like it or not, it's a process. There's none that we love and there's none that we hate. You just have to accept that this is what we have to do. And the application form process can be very off-putting for people. What I would say is, if the effort is made around preparing your application form, it's half the prep done in a way for your interview. So it isn't a waste of time. So don't be put off by it, is what I would say. And don't underestimate the value of the application, because essentially the application is what gets you in the door to be interviewed. I'll start off maybe even by talking about the job specification. Sometimes I think candidates come in for an interview and they haven't even really read the job specification. So I think an understanding of the role you are applying for is important. And also, I think where sometimes candidates fall down is they think too much about the job they're in. And if you think about it, they've competed for that job, they've been successful, they are in that role. What they have to do is project towards the role they are applying for. So read the job description, have a really important understanding of the role they are applying for, and pitch their experience to that. So your application form will show you have to put your education in, you have to fill in your career to date, and don't leave gaps. If there's a year where you took a time out, just say you took a time out for whatever reason, family reasons, career break, whatever, to travel. It's just don't leave a gap there. So when you've filled in your career and you do a brief outline of the roles and responsibilities associated with that, don't overthink it. It's just a synopsis of your career. Where you really have to put the thinking in is around the eligibility criteria. But the eligibility criteria is an opportunity to demonstrate your experience relevant to that criteria. It's not asking for you to give an example or one example. It's not. You outline your experience and frame it to suit whatever the eligibility criteria is. Because if you do not do that, you do not get an interview. And you have to pass through the SIFT process. You have to pass each eligibility criteria. So there's no, if you do super in two of them and then you don't really put the work in one, it won't matter. You have to get through the process for all of them.
Let's say you've passed and you've got through the SIFT and you are now being called for interview.
Yeah.
In terms of some of the preparation you need to do for that, what advice would you give?
Again, we'll go back to the job specification, because that outlines really everything you need to know as far as your prep for your interview. Depending on the grade of you're going to, the competencies are going to be different, but they're all kind of within a family, So you'll go from, say, teamwork up to, say, leadership. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's understanding, again, what the competencies are. And you don't have to guess, right? Because when you look at your job specification, you'll have a competency. And under that, you'll have what we call behavioral anchors. So little bullet points with an outline of what
the interviewers
are looking for you to demonstrate. So if you are answering a question on a specific competency, the interviewer is qualified in it, right? The interviewer knows what they're supposed to be doing. They have an understanding of their role. So they will start with an open question. And essentially what they're asking is to give a specific example relevant to that competency. Now, remember, competency-based interviews are all around specific experience that you demonstrate from your career to date. What I would say is it's always relevant to the role. So don't ever forget your experience is relevant to the role you're applying for. So if you're applying for, a position as a project manager or a cloud technician or something like that, your experience you're demonstrating in your example should be career focused, bringing in that area where you're moving into. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm just wondering if we could talk a little bit about the format of the interview itself, the timings, is there note taking? If you could.
So the chairperson is somebody who's independent, and the role of the chair in an interview is to ensure that every candidate, first of all, that the process is run appropriately, and every candidate gets a fair run, and they all get more or less the same experience, right? The chair will introduce the process. So the competency-based interviews, again, depending on the level, but the timeline is usually around the 45 minutes per interview, and each candidate is told that. The candidate will be told who from the interview board will cover what competency and explain, it'll pass over to Joe when we move on, and then Pat will do evaluating information, problem solving, decision making, whatever it is. The interview board will take notes, but that just really is for a reference for the interview board themselves to look back on, because sometimes, depending on the size of the campaign, you're seeing a number of candidates. So, you will need to just have a look back at notes. But the notes isn't a transcription of your interview. Okay. So sometimes people expect when they ask for their notes, then they say, I said a lot more than that. You absolutely might have. Mm-hmm. The interview board might just have some key words written down, or some, small little something that will tweak their memory when they come, and they'll know Thelma from Joyce, from Kate, or from whomever. The candidates it'll be explained to them, look, the interviewers may interrupt them, don't be put off by that. We could be running out of time. It could be just need to focus you, or you will say something and the interviewer will want to probe a little bit more into that. The chair of the interview will also let a candidate know if there is something specific, relevant to the interview that they maybe didn't get an opportunity to say, that they will give them an opportunity to do that at the end of the interview, or if there was a question or something that they wanted to ask. Now, what I will say to people is, you've had potentially 45 minutes. You've had good opportunity to talk about your experience. So that isn't a time where you then start and give a big 10-minute summation on all about yourself. If there was something specific you want to add, but it has to be shortened to the point. You've been in there 45 minutes. You're done really, or you might have a question that you want to ask.
Should a person prepare a couple of examples for each competency?
Definitely. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where I've given an example and then you're asked something else and you're sitting there thinking, oh gosh, sometimes people go out of an interview and they think, oh my gosh, I didn't get a chance to say this, or I didn't get a chance to say that. That's ideal, because you've prepared a lot and you were ready. So you're not in a situation where you're stuck and you don't know what to say and you've already used your example. And sometimes it's not an easy process and people are nervous, understandably so. And sometimes you're asked a question and you use an example you had for one competency with another, because they're kind of interlinked in some way. And if you have nothing else prepared, you're thrown. So I would say be prepared. Proper preparation prevents poor performance, as they say. So yeah.
And Joyce, how far back can or should a person be able to go in their career if they're given examples? Or does it have to be very up-to-date examples?
Well, we do work in technology, and technology changes. So you'd be hoping that the experience that they're drawing from would be relatively recent. Yeah. That's not to say good experience from a number of years ago can't be drawn on. I'm not saying that, but I would wonder why you wouldn't use some recent experience for an example,
So the candidates is in the interview, and then the candidates the interview is finished. How is the person scored?
Okay, well, there's a scoring structure associated with it, which the interview board would have. On each competency, the candidate has to reach at least 40. So if you score anything between 1 and 39 on any competency, you've failed the interview. Okay, so essentially what the board are saying, you failed to demonstrate to a suitable level, a pass level, at that particular competency. Then you move into the scoring bracket, which is essentially, now you get paperwork, and I'm not going to, I won't have the exact words, but you're in an acceptable level. So it's essentially saying you've demonstrated satisfactory level of knowledge in this competency. And that's where a lot of people will score, in that 40 to, I think it's 69 level. So that's satisfactory, and that's perfectly fine. And a lot of the markings will be in that, because it's a significant range there. Then you move into a category that's good, and that's 70 to, I think it's 89, I think it is. And then 90 and above is very good. So that's the scoring. So you have to get at least 40 in all of the competencies, or you don't pass the interview. There are 4 specific competencies that you are questioned on, and then you have communications and interpersonal skills. And that starts with your submission, your application, and it's how you conduct yourself throughout the interview. And it's even how you present yourself. It's not so much that you get a bad mark, if you're not suitably attired, but you're not presenting in a way. You should always make an effort and present yourself professionally at an interview. I mean, look, and I've sat on many an interview board, nobody's ever come in a tracksuit or whatever, but people do come in a t-shirt, sometimes a t-shirt and a pair of trousers. And I would say that's not acceptable. You need to present yourself in a professional way and make an effort. Yeah.
Take off the baseball cap.
Yeah. And I'm not even saying you have to have a suit, but a shirt and a pair of trousers, present yourself. So, yeah.
What, in your experience, separates a satisfactory candidate to a really good candidate?
Yeah. I think it depends. Obviously, it will have to do with the candidate's experience. And sometimes people think they have to be very polished in their delivery, or they have to, sound super, super intelligent. It's not about that. It's to try and present yourself and be able to get out the breadth of your knowledge and experience around that specific competency, and to ensure that they get to the point quickly, so that they've set the scene essentially for the interview board, that they're not left wondering, where's Thelma going with this now? I'm not really sure what she's trying to say to me. And then you get the meat of your example, and there has to be good experience. And again, I'm going back to the job description that tells you what you should be demonstrating for this competency in your example, and then the outcome of that.
So past experience is a good indicator of future experience, I guess, and people should be drawn from that.
Exactly. And the ability for you to be able to step it up to that next level.
Do we give additional marks for somebody who has a particular qualification?
No. We did once upon a time back in the day, but we don't. We don't. And we rarely even now call out that you have to have a specific qualification. Obviously, if you have it, you know, it's extra knowledge. Oh, absolutely, put it in. Your education is key. That's never a load to carry, but you won't necessarily get extra marks. But you could potentially be describing your experience and you're able to do a lot more because you have. So, you know, it pays off in different ways.
Joyce, is there a particular pattern you've seen with people who maybe have not been successful at interviews and go again and are again unsuccessful? And what might that be?
I think one of the situations I would have seen quite a bit is, you know, somebody has gone for, I'll just say, a grade 5.
Okay.
And they were grade 5 maybe for, I don't know, a year, and they go for a grade 6. Now, because our department has grown so significantly, you know, we've had a lot of opportunities and people have been promoted quickly compared to back in the day when you were years at a particular grade before you were promoted. And the speedy isn't necessarily a good thing entirely either, but sometimes people have gone for an interview at grade 5 and they've been successful, and they go for 6 and they give you the same examples. You know, they're not talking about what they've done as a grade 5 necessarily. And some of that is a little bit of laziness, I would suggest, that they have these examples from before. Sure, they did me great, I'll go again and use these. And you forget, something I said earlier, you forget you're not going for the same job. You are saying, I'm ready now to step up to that next level. So you have to demonstrate a higher level of experience and a higher level of, you know, experience that you've shown over the last year or whatever. And sometimes too, you know, think about the competency. So for planning and organizing skills or planning, delivering results, sometimes people get very caught up and they tell you what they did. And they forget that the competency really is about how you organize yourself, how you manage your time, your resources, how you plan. What do you do even in advance of doing something to ensure when the rubber hits the road, you're ready, you know? So think about the competency. Again, I'm going back to the job description. Those little behavioral anchors tell you exactly what you have to factor into your example. So that's important.
Just on to that point, Joyce, so somebody may have experience of working in a team and perhaps things have not always gone so well.
Yes.
Is it all right in an interview to say, look, this didn't work out well, we had conflict within the team, or I had a challenging person that is that something that
absolutely, because that's real. That's you know, and even things go wrong. And you make mistakes, and it's absolutely okay to say that, but you learn from them. And often we learn a lot more from something going wrong than from everything going right. And everything doesn't go right all the time. We all make mistakes. We're all human at the end of the day. And absolutely, to be able to say, you know, you could be asked in an interview, have you ever made a bad decision? Or did you ever, you know, sometimes we're there and we're caught in a situation. Do we make a decision? Or do we just sit on our hands and hope for the best? You can't do that, you know, and sometimes you don't have all of the information. You have to do something, and it mightn't go, half it might be okay. You might realize, oh God, that didn't work. But the reason it didn't work was, and be able to talk to that. And the next time you're in a situation, and sure enough, you will be in a situation again where something similar happens. And then you can say, well, actually, I know exactly what I need to do now, because before, when I was caught in a similar situation, it went wrong. So you're always learning by your experience, and that'll separate an acceptable candidate from a good candidate, you know? Because we all know we don't get everything right all the time. And if we're saying we are, and I'm interviewing you and you're telling me I've never made a bad decision, I've never had a bit of trouble anywhere, I'm thinking, well, you are not living in the same world I'm living in.
Joyce, for somebody, if it's their first interview, is there any advice you'd give? So it's their first time coming for interview. What do you?
First time coming for interview. Yeah, it's funny actually. I worked with somebody, maybe a year ago, who was new to the organization and going for their first interview. And one of the things she said a couple of times, this is much harder. This is much harder than I thought, right? Because sometimes when you go for an interview, your first interview for, an entry-level role in external organizations, it seems to be very different than this structured one. And what I would say is, you really do have to do your homework. You have to understand the process and ask for help. Ask somebody to, tell me what to expect. And hopefully this here will help people who are preparing for the first time. And it's that whole examples piece. I don't think if you go for an interview somewhere, maybe outside the organization, it isn't like that. It isn't where you have to talk about something that you have done. So, there's no getting away from that prep that you really need to do. You really need to demonstrate, I can do all of these things and fulfill these competency requirements. And how I tell you that is tell you something that I have done. So there's no easy way around doing your homework. And for sure, I say to people, your job is to make life easy for the interviewers.
Okay.
Don't assume they know me, they know I'm good, they know what I've done. Mm-hmm. They might be sitting there really hoping and wanting the best for you, but you can't expect them to do your job for you. Do your prep, put the effort in, and it pays off.
I know I'm backtracking a little, but for somebody who's coming externally for an interview, as distinct from somebody who's already within the organization and have a good sense of the organization, is there any advice for an external candidate?
So you have to go and do a bit of research. I would say go onto the website, look up, what are the main goals for technology and transformation. Why are we doing what we're doing? Be familiar with, as I say, the priority programs. Obviously, the electronic health record, which is now the One Health Record program, is the big ticket item. And all of the other priority programs probably will be feeding into that ultimately to where we're going to be in 5 years' time or whatever, hopefully. So do the research. But I would say our internal candidates need to know what's going on as well, and not just within their own program. Look, they don't need chapter and verse, but they need to have an overview of what's going on and why we're doing what we're doing. And I mean, some people will know their area if they're on a specific program. But, and if somebody tells you, I'm just buried in my own program, I'm working so hard. Well, lift your head every now and again and understand what's going on and why you're doing what you're doing and where it fits into the overarching organization and what we're trying to do. Yeah.